Welcome back to BYoungMinistry.blogspot.com to another blog out of the 11th chapter of John. Welcome to those who access the podcast through the BYoung Ministry YouTube page. Today we're in John chapter 11 verses 5 through 16, which reads, Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, Let us go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back? Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they will see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. After he had said this, he went on to tell them, Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, Let us also go, that we may die with him. John chapter 11, verses 5 through 16. The Lord Jesus deliberately waited going to Bethany. And Mary and Martha's hearts were breaking. Had the Lord Jesus been there with them, presumably he would have prevented Lazarus from dying. Yet it was God's will for Lazarus to die. And according to verse 5, Jesus loved Martha. Own gods when God doesn't perform according to the way we think he should. Sometimes God doesn't answer, he delays. And most often we conclude God's delays are his denials. Sometimes if we wait, he has been known to do the unbelievable. But very often we conclude prayer doesn't work. To my shame, I have to admit that I have reached the wrong conclusion about God from time to time. In fact, I did it this past February when my middle son flatlined and was in a coma for 2 days. I had learned that there is a good part to this. This is how we grow, sometimes by failing. And the beauty is there is a loving God who doesn't give up on us. No, he trains us to grow in our trust in him. This is one of the many expressions of God's love. The delay helps us. It doesn't really hurt us. It makes us stronger in our trust in him. So the Lord Jesus deliberately delayed because he loved this family and knew this would strengthen their faith as they learned the ultimate outcome when God would raise Lazarus from the dead. That is a hard lesson to learn. I have struggled over this many times myself, but it is true. Painful experiences are God's gifts to drive us to his heart, to increase our capacity for him. Once seized, the disciples are useful, or the disciplines are useful to us, helping others find their way in their pursuit of the Lord Jesus. When the messenger returned, he delivered the message of the Lord Jesus. This sickness will not end in death. Yet, Lazarus had already been dead for 2 days. Can you imagine what it was like in Bethany? The doubt probably was at an all-time high. Obviously, the Lord was mistaken. We have all been there. The disappointment is crippling to our faith. And yes, yet, we must arrive at this place from time to time. In verse 7, the Lord Jesus then said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." According to verse 8, the disciples balked at his words. To this, in verses 9 and 10, the Lord Jesus emphasizes the key. The key is the light. And this type of light is made more prominent to us in the darkest of times. In verses 10 through 16, we learn the disciples are baffled by the Lord Jesus' actions. They had just left Judea a week or so before because of the fear that the Jews were about to put Jesus to death. Leaving must have relieved them, but now the Lord Jesus wants to go back. In verses 11 through 16, according to the Lord Jesus, death is a form of sleep. In other words, death is not final. It is a doorway to a greater experience. Death leaves those who are left brokenhearted and lonely with answers, with hope. But it's difficult to get to this place where we recognize that the worst of moments is perhaps the best. In verse 15, the Lord Jesus said he was glad he was not there when Lazarus died. Notice why. For the sake of the disciples. The Lord Jesus delayed going to Bethany so that his followers' faith might be strengthened by the delay. Their doubts and questions would serve their faith. But they had to go through the pain before God showed up. Notice Thomas's words in verse 16. Let us also go that we may die with him. I think there's a twinge of sarcasm in that statement. And we are just like Thomas. When God does not work according to the way we think he should, we get sarcastic. The arrogance of the human mind that thinks it knows better than the Almighty never fails to amaze me. I'm surprised it didn't amaze the Lord Jesus. He's not fazed by it. In fact, later in the Gospel of John, the Lord Jesus placates to the demand of doubting Thomas. More like faithless Thomas. And the antidote to our lack of faith, our doubt, our sarcasm, the antidote is to believe his word. Trust his word. Because his word will never fail. We got to be careful to let God define truth for us, not we ourselves. And when we trust him to do so, and we live life accordingly, wow, the excitement has just begun. My friends, I trust this podcast is helpful to you in your walk with the Lord. If I could be of further assistance to you, don't hesitate to shoot me an email at BYoungMinistry@gmail.com. Hey, have a great day.